Hi and welcome to Jessie James Beads. My name is Jem and today we're kicking off National Craft Month with a blueberry pie mini mix sunlight catcher. Let's head down to the board, take a closer look at what we're making and then we'll make one together. Let's make a cheerful spring-inspired sunlight catcher to bring the flowers in. I've chosen to work with the Market Fresh mini mix in blueberry pie and I've picked a handful of beads. There's some rondelles, some rounds, some metal and some crystal. You could work entirely from your bead stash. I just happen to really like this mini mix. We're going to start by creating the floral form in the centre of our sunlight catcher. I've cut an 18-inch length of that 18 gauge round wire. I'm working with raw copper. You can use any medium craft wire that you like. I'll be using my 6-step bail making pliers today and I'm going to use the number 2 step to create a rounded central aperture. So I'm just going to bring that around. I'm going to stop just before I create a full circular form and then switch over to my bent chain nose pliers. Once I've got 2 circuits of wire around that central form, I'm going to draw the wire away. You can see I've loosely looped my wire around just to make it easier to handle on the board. So I've brought the wire away at 90 degrees to that central form and I'm just going to start warming the next couple of inches through. We're going to create the petals of the design now, and generally speaking when I'm making floral designs I tend to make odd numbers. It just looks really pretty in the design. I'm bringing in again my 6-step bail makers and I'm going to probably choose, I think, number 3 or number 4, as long as I use the same one over and over again. And I'm going to offer that into the wire. Just push the wire all the way around until it goes back towards the centre. Now I'm leaving a gap between the start point and the end point for each petal. And then I'm going to use my bent chain nose pliers just to hold across that wire, to draw that back in the opposite direction. I'm not making a very tight or very firm sharp bend in the wire just here, just enough to add a little bit of separation between each of those petals. I'm going to continue until I have 7 petals all the way radiating around that central form. So again I'm using number 3 on those bail makers, and what I'm going to do is make one that's slightly too long in order to show you how to fix that. So you can see that that second petal is much too long for the design. So if I pop the pin of my pliers back in, I'm going to rotate those around until the petal looks to be about the same size. Then I'm going to draw that wire strongly back towards the centre, and in that way you can create petals that are around about the same size. So I will simply repeat this until I have 7 petals. And I'm going to endeavour to space it around so that I meet back towards the start point. Once you've got your 7 petals, you could go for 9, you could go for slightly chubbier ones, slightly thinner ones like I have, whatever you like to see in your floral design. But once you've got that 7th petal in position, I'm just going to allow the stem of the design to come away and we're going to add on some beads before we continue. So the order I'm going to use for mine, let's just straighten out that stem. And then I'm going to add on one of these beautiful blue rondelles. Then I'm going to go for one of these gorgeous, almost millefiore designs. Then I'm going to use one of these fabulous oversized faceted rice shape beads. And then down towards the bottom of the design, I'm going to add this giant, gorgeously faceted and overlaid in colour pear drops. So let's bring the piece back up the right way. Now I'm going to leave a bit of a space just before I reach where the petals sit and just estimate where I think I will want the leaves to begin down at the bottom. So I'm going to leave a bit of space for wrapping wire. I'm going to hold across that design and then pull the wire out to one side. Let's just smooth and warm that through. So there's a bit of a space so that I can add some wrapping in a little while. What we're going to do now is to create some little leaf style designs down at the base of this floral piece. So I'm just going to use my thumb to push upwards to create a little bit of an arc, and then I'm going to kick the end out and away. If I just grip on the end of the design there and bring that wire back across. Now what I'm looking to do is to create a lovely arced shape down at the bottom of the design, so I can sit this into an oval piece of wire to surround my flower or my floral motif. So I'm just going to grip very firmly on the stem and push this into a position that I think will look nice. Let's give that a bit of a squish and a squeeze. And then I'm going to try and replicate that leaf design down at the base. So I'm going to estimate a similar length, pull the wire back down, and then change the grip on the pliers to bring that back up and make that same kind of arc shape on the other side. It looks like a little bit of a comedy moustache at the moment. So let's just trim away any excess that you may have. Pop that to one side for now. We'll probably find a use for that later. So you'll need to spend a couple of minutes just refining that design down at the base. Now they don't have to be an identical size, but you do want a nice smooth arcing shape down at the base, and you can of course refine the points on that design should you wish to. I'm going to give that a little bit of a flatten to make sure it sits smooth and flat down. And if you wanted to, you could pull those beads out of the way, pop this on a block, and if you do have a block and a hammer, and just add a little bit of strength to that. You can also do the same just to the tips of the petals. Now to draw everything together, we're going to use a 24 gauge wire. I have an 18-inch length just here, and what we're going to do is to start just near the top of the design. Now you can spend a few minutes just spacing those petals exactly how you want to, so that you can get the flower that you imagined. What we're going to do is to wind on 3 or 4 times just in between 2 of those petals near the top of the design. So if I just put around about 3/4 of an inch over the top, you might like to use your pliers just to help you get that all the way around, and we're just going to wrap onto those petals, as I say, a good 3 or 4 times just to get a really nice strong starting point for this design to all be held together. If you can only manage 3 times, that's absolutely fine. I think probably I'm going to go for 3 today. And there we go, over the top. So I'm going to trim that end away into the scrap pot so it doesn't end up in my toes. Make sure that that cut end sits down flat against that wire. Once you've got that little wrap of wires up at the top, make sure that they are good and strong. I'm then going to add on one of my beads. Now for this design from Blueberry Pie, I'm going to use one of these gorgeously two-tone faceted smaller rondelles. And I'm going to allow that to sit over the surface of that form that we created earlier. So we made a nice large hold coil. And what we're going to do now is to just wrap a couple of times around where we began the petal design. So where the wire left the spiral and became the first petal, I'm going to wrap twice around there. So let's draw that tail all the way through once. Push the end up through all the way around a second time. Now what we're going to do is to tie the last petal, or the first petal here rather, to the stem. So just pinch those together and start wrapping. Now you can go for 1 twist around the stem and then 1 twist around the petal and the stem, or you can choose any weaving pattern of your choice. I'm just going to scooch those wires up so they're nice and firm. 1 around both, 1 around just the stem. Let's push that wire up again and continue until you reach your first bead just below the petal line. Don't scooch them all up because we want to add some more definition in there in just a minute. So I've just connected the petal to the stem, so everything is quite stable now. What we're going to do is we're going to just add a little bit of extra detail to that stem. So you can see there's a little bit of a gap in between each of those beads, and that's exactly what I want. My finer wire is still attached after I've done that little bit of weaving. So I'm going to push the first bead up into position. My finer wire is currently underneath, so I'm just going to halo around the outside of that bead from underneath to over the top of that central core wire, and I'm just going to wrap around once, and then I'm going to do the same wrap but on the other side. So now from the top I'm going to take that wire all the way around the outside of the bead to underneath. Let's draw that around once, so we're back on the opposite side, so from underneath to over the top. And then last of all, we can fit this last little one in as well. So it's just adding a little extra highlight, glint of wire to your sunlight catcher. So the wire starting on top of the core wire, all the way around the outside of that lovely pear-shaped bead. Just make sure that it sits on the outside, give it a bit of a grip, and then take that to, you can take it to underneath or over the top to be honest, but I'm going to take that to underneath to match the rest of that design that we've done so far. So I've just wrapped twice around at the bottom, and I'm just going to make sure that that's nice and tight before trimming away. We're then going to create a frame into which this will sit. And we're going to use that wire in just a moment, so don't get rid of that. You do need to make sure that that end is sealed firmly against that heavier wire, but you've got your floral design, and we're going to now create a form for that to sit inside. You will need around 24 inches of 18 gauge wire. I'm again using raw copper, but you could use any craft wire. What we're looking to do is to create a nice oval frame into which we can add our lovely floral design. So I'm just going to give that a really good smooth and warm through. And then I'm going to find a round form which I can use as the basis for my design. We're going to look to be creating the round form in approximately the centre of our beautiful copper wire. So I'm just going to use this bead pot, Jessie James Beads bead pot, just to create a rounded kind of teardrop shape and allow the wire to spring back out. And what we're going to do is attach our beautiful flower into that frame using the residue of the 24 gauge wire which we took away from the end of our little bit of pattern. So I've got my tail of wire, that again was 24 gauge, and I'm just going to attach the base of the floral design to the centre of this oval piece of wire, and we'll work on how to attach the top in just a moment. Now you can use any pattern that you like, so I'm probably going to replicate this fairly open pattern, which is once around the frame, and I'm going to just start about in the middle of that strand of wire that I've got to hand. I'm going to just wrap that once around the frame, and then I'm going to wrap once around both the frame and the base of that design. And it's quite a loose little design here, so once around just the frame, and I'm leaving a gap between each of those wraps. Once around both the frame and the flower, the little leaves down at the base of that design, scooch those a little bit tighter perhaps, and then once around just the frame. Now you can go for a real tight weave if you want to, which I will show you in just a second on the demonstration piece I have over to the right of the screen. But this is just a really quick and easy way to create a nice strong form for your sunlight catcher. When you do get to the end of your chosen weaving segment, and I'm going to weave all the way along, finish off with a couple of wraps around just that frame. So if I take the tail of the wire around once, around twice, around a third time, and then I'm going to trim that away, making sure that that is really neat and tidy against the frame wire. Give it a squish. I'll do exactly the same thing in the other direction. Now, of course, you can decide to have your flower moving straight upwards, but I kind of like it being a little bit quirky and just bending over gently to one side. So once I've got the curvature in my flower, I'm going to manually create a surround for this piece. Just warming that wire through and arcing it gently until you get a shape that meets over the top. Now I will want to create a little wrapped loop up at the top in a moment, but the main thing is to connect your flower with at least one petal. You can go for two if you like, but this is not a piece of worn jewellery, it's a decorative item. So I would say as long as you wrap 3 times around the frame and then a couple of times around the petal as well, and then 3 times around the frame to finish off, you will get a really lovely safe connection. So let's again start in the middle of our tiny scrap of wire, wrapping once around the frame, and then we will go once around the frame and the petal, and then we'll finish off with 3 wraps around just the frame in this direction. And in that way you'll have a nice connection point for your flower to sit at its jaunty angle. So I'm just going to tighten that up before I trim that little tail away. As ever, look twice before you cut, and then repeat exactly the same thing in the opposite direction. Once you've attached your flower onto the frame, we can create a little upright bend in the centre at the top. Now it doesn't have to be dead centre, the whole thing has got quite a quirky feel to it. I'm just going to create one of those wires into an upright, and then the second wire I'm going to wrap around it. So we have a core wire and we have a wrapping wire. I'm going to grip across the wrapping wire at the point it crosses over the top and just push that backwards and away so that we can connect those two together. Let's bring that back down into view. And then I'm going to draw that tail around 3 times around this upright section. So you need to pinch quite firmly. If you struggle to do that with your hand, you can use a pair of pliers just to hold on to that side and then draw that tail around. We're going to wrap 3 times today around that central wire. Once you've got that little spiral going, we're going to tighten it up slightly. Just squish that down until it sits in a pleasing fashion. Now just make sure that you're happy with the shape that you've created, and if you wanted to, you could add some more beads from this beautiful blueberry pie mini mix. What we're going to do, however, is to decorate the drop. So all the way at the top here, we're going to add on one of the metal ovals from the bead mix, and then I'm going to use this side wire to add a little bit of extra definition to that drop. So there's lots and lots of beads going on. Now for this one, I'm going to go from the top of the core wire with that wrapping wire all the way around the edge and underneath the core. I'm going to pinch that very firmly as I bring that tail around a couple of times. Ideally, we're looking to have the same number of wraps between each station on that central line, but you don't have to. You can make it as quirky or as uneven as you like. You can make it really asymmetrical if you desire. I think I'm going to take that all the way around to the other side now and over the top one more time. So let's add another bead in. Probably this gorgeous titanium coloured floral inspired bead. Drop that all the way down, and the technique is exactly the same. Grip very firmly onto the bead you're wrapping. Take your wrapping wire, give it a little bit of a smooth and a warm, all the way around the edge of the bead and underneath your core wire, and then we will wrap once, twice, and a third time over the top. If your spirals become a little loose, you can tighten them up, and then we're going to add in that final beautiful titanium colour crystal up at the top. Keep that nice and steady, protect your bead, draw your tail of wire all the way around, and let's go once and twice and a third time just here. Now, as you can see, my little wraps are a little bit spaced, so let's tighten those up. Very, very simple and quick fix. So we're going to add a hanging loop now. You don't need a spiral up at the top if you don't want to. So let's say that we don't want a spiral. Let's take that wrapping wire to the rear side. Trim that away carefully, making sure you cut the correct part, and then make sure it sits down flat on that central core wire. So you've got the crux of your design. We're just going to create a hanging loop up at the top. So let's grip across that central core wire, bring the wire out to one side, and then choose your size that you want to add on. I've still got my 6-step bail makers, so I'm going to use number 4 just to create a round form up at the top there. Draw the tail all the way around, and then I'm going to wrap to fill that gap. Now, as I said, you don't have to have a spiral if you don't want to. If you don't want to, you can simply finish with the wire at the rear, exactly as we did a second ago. However, if you do want to add a little bit of extra decor up at the top, make sure that you tighten up those spirals so that they're neat and tidy. I'm going to trim this section of wire away to around about 2 inches. And then I'm going to use the number 1 on my bail making pliers to create a rounded form. And I'm not going to complete that rounded form. I'll just show you that sideways. And then I'm going to push that into the tail of the wire so that we get a nice central spiral going. The slower you move when you're creating spirals, the neater and tidier they will be. So I tend to use quite small movements to get those spirals neat and tidy and strong. Once you've finished spiraling, you can sit that up and over the top, and then it's simply time to add on your hanging loop. I've just got some threading material. Now, as an extension to this design, you could take on some more of those beads from the beautiful mini mix, and you could add them on down the sides. I've shown you a couple of times now how to add a little halo design, or you could simply pop some in the end of each of those petals. I hope that you have enjoyed National Craft Month with the Blueberry Pie mini mix. You could of course use your bead stash.